Chapter 15. The Last Day. Septimus awoke early in his little bedroom at the top of the house on Snake Slipway. Outside the snow was falling fast, and the room was dull with the gray winter morning light. He lit his bedside candle and leaned back against the pillow, reluctant to get out of bed. That was one thing he would not miss. The wizard tower was always a perfect temperature. Marcellus's house was, like all old castle houses during the big freeze, bitterly cold. An hour later Septimus was with Marcellus in an old lock-up at the end of Gold Button Drop, a dead-end alleyway just off the end of Alchemy Way. The lock-up was a cover for a secret entrance to Alchemy Quay, which Marcellus had recently reopened. After locking the little iron door behind them, Marcellus pulled open the circular manhole cover in the center of the earthen floor. A glow of red light shone upward, lighting the rough stones of the lock-up's conical roof. Carefully, Marcellus unhooked a small fire globe from its peg just below the manhole cover, clipped it onto his belt, and began the descent down the iron rungs, set into the brick chimney. Septimus swung himself in after Marcellus, and pulled the trapdoor shut with a clang. There followed a long descent down a brick-lined shaft, eerily lit with the red light from the globe. Eventually, Marcellus and Septimus reached a wide, brick-lined tunnel, and set off along it. Some minutes later they emerged into the first curve of the labyrinth, but instead of turning left as they normally did for the great chamber, Marcellus turned right and led Septimus out onto Alchemy Way. "It is the last day, apprentice," Marcellus said. "It is," agreed Septimus, wondering what Marcellus had in mind. He hoped it was going to be more interesting than cleaning sand out from cupboards with a toothbrush. "Septimus," said Marcellus, "I wish to apologize for sending you off on a wild goose chase to collect the cloud flask. I needed time to think." "Oh?" said Septimus. "Indeed, and your absence made me realize how much I valued you. I have made an error in not telling you everything that I am doing here." "Ah," said Septimus, not entirely surprised. Marcellus took a deep breath, aware that he was taking an irrevocable step. "I want to show you the fire," he said. Septimus did not understand. "But you haven't lit it yet." "Apprentice, the furnace that you see in the great chamber is a decoy. The true fire has already begun." Suddenly things began to make sense. "Where?" "Come, I will explain." Marcellus led Septimus over to the edge of the quay, where the pink paddle-boat bobbed quietly, tethered to its ring. Marcellus kept it just in case. An alchemist always had an emergency escape route. The underflow pool lay dark at their feet, and the familiar feeling of vertigo that always got to Septimus when he stood on the edge of the underflow pool made him feel dizzy. "See the currents in the water?" asked Marcellus. Septimus nodded. 100 feet down from here is a sluice gate. Some weeks ago I opened it. Now water is flowing through it, pouring down a channel bored through the rock, to a reservoir far below. This is the water that is making the fire." "But water doesn't make fire," said Septimus. "Alchemical fire is different," said Marcellus. "It is a beautiful living thing, and life needs water. Before you leave me, Septimus, I want you to see it, so that when you return to the wizard tower, you will understand that whatever they may tell you about the fire, it is not true." Septimus was puzzled. "But no one has ever told me anything about the fire," he said. "They do not speak of it," said Marcellus. "But if they ever do, I would like you to understand that it is not the terrible thing they say it is." "Right. But there is one little thing." "Yes?" said Septimus warily. "Promise me that you will tell no one what you see today." Marcellus glanced around as though he expected to find Marcia lurking in a corner. "Not even Marcia." "I can't promise that," Septimus said regretfully. "Not now that I am going to go back to Marcia. Anyway, Marcia asked you to start the fire, didn't she? So she knows already. Marcia thinks the fire we are lighting is in the great chamber of alchemy. She does not know that the true fire is in the place that all extraordinary wizards fear and have promised to keep sealed forevermore, the chamber of fire. If she knew that, she would close it down, just as Julius Pike once did. I don't think Marcia would close it down, because she doesn't know anything about it." "Of course she knows about it," said Marcellus. "She is the extraordinary wizard. But before I was coming here, I asked her about the fire, and she said she didn't know a thing. Nothing." "There are many things apprentices are not told," said Marcellus. Septimus was not convinced. He knew when Marcia was deliberately not telling him things. She had a certain "don't go there" warning look in her eyes. But when they had discussed the fire, Marcia's expression had been one of bemusement. He remembered her saying, "There is something about this fire stuff that we just don't know anymore. I wish I knew what it was." "Apprentice, let me explain," said Marcellus. After the great alchemy disaster, the extraordinary wizard Julius Pike, who was once my dear friend, told me that he would make sure that all future extraordinary wizards would never allow the fire chamber to be unsealed. Never again would the fire cauldron be used. The only reason Marcia has agreed to the fire is because she thinks it is the one in the great chamber of alchemy, and I know that, like any other extraordinary wizard, Marcia would never let the chamber of fire be opened. All I ask you is to keep it secret for... Marcellus did some quick calculations. Another month? After that, I will reveal it to Marcia, I promise. But why in a month? Why not tell Marcia now? It will not be ready until then. Alchemical fire is delicate in its early stages of life and takes time to reach maturity. But once the fire is ready and Marcia sees that it has been burned safely for some time, then I have a chance to prove to her that all is not as she has been told. Do you understand? I suppose so. Septimus understood, but it did not make keeping the secret feel any better. Marcellus was uneasy. It felt decidedly risky having Septimus go back to Marcia at such a delicate time. That, apprentice, is why I am so sorry you are leaving me now, before it all begins. Perhaps when you see the fire you will reconsider your decision to leave. It's not really my decision, said Septimus. Indeed, no. While you are Marcia's apprentice, it is not your decision. It is hers. But if you were to decide to become the castle's first alchemy apprentice, then that would be different. Marcellus left the offer hanging in the air. Sometimes, said Septimus, staring at his reflection in the dark waters of the underflow, I wish there were two of me. I wish I could be in the wizard tower and here at the same time. Marcellus smiled. Even the greatest magic cannot make that happen, he said. Not for longer than 7 seconds, said Septimus. Marcellus looked impressed that it could happen at all. Septimus thought for a while. Okay, he said. There were 3 arches leading off from the alchemy quay, each one lit by a fire globe. Marcellus headed for the right-hand archway. Inside the archway he turned to Septimus apologetically. I know you do not like building work, apprentice, but I assure you this is the last you will have to do. Marcellus opened the old carpet-bag in which every day he brought their lunch, and to Septimus's surprise, from underneath the neatly wrapped sandwiches, he took out a hammer and heavy chisel, which he handed to Septimus. Thanks, said Septimus ruefully. Marcellus indicated a shallow arch within the bricks, just above head height. Remove the bricks below the arch, please, apprentice. They should come out quite easily. Septimus sighed and got to work. He was pleased to find that the bricks did indeed come away easily. Alchemist's mortar never set, said Marcellus. It began as a mistake when we had to do a lot of building ourselves. Looks solid, but is as soft as butter. Very useful at times. Septimus took away the rest of the bricks below the arch. Behind them there is a black shiny surface reflected in the flames of the fire globe. Marcellus smiled. I understand you have seen something like this before. Septimus looked suspicious. It's not some kind of time glass, is it? He asked. Marcellus looked guilty. Oh dear, I am so sorry about the way we met, apprentice. It was, I see now, very wrong. You do know I would never do that again, do you not? Marcellus picked up the chisel, counted down from the top brick on the right-hand side of the doorway. He levered out the 7th brick and placed his hand on the smooth black substance behind it. A faint green light began to glow beneath it. Septimus stared at it, astonished. You recognize it, apprentice? Marcellus smiled. Is this a moving chamber? Indeed it is. Like the one on the Isles of Siren? Pretty much. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the finer details of its operation. I used to know it, but like many memories, it has faded. I was hoping you might remember. I would like to get it working again. So much more pleasant than the long climb down. To the chamber of fire? To the chamber of fire. So, apprentice, shall we go? Gingerly, Septimus stretched out his hand and placed his palm on the opening plate, the worn part of the smooth, cool surface behind the brick. The green light sprang up below once again. It grew bright and then began to fade. Oh, said Septimus, that shouldn't happen. He took his hand away and rubbed it on his tunic. Then he put it back and leaned his whole weight against the surface. This time the green light immediately glowed bright, and suddenly, silently, a concealed oval door slid open, revealing a tiny, blue-lit chamber. Oh, well done, said Marcellus, excited. Shall we step inside? Septimus followed Marcellus through the door into a virtually spherical space. Its walls were a smooth, shiny black material with no obvious features. It was, as far as Septimus could tell, identical to the one he had known on the Isles of Siren. Perhaps you would like to close the door, apprentice? Septimus was not sure that he would. Marcellus, "When did you last use this?" he asked. Marcellus looked surprised. "Oh, goodness! Well, it's all a bit of a blur, really. There was a lot going on at the time. Esmeralda was with me, I remember that. So, about 475 years ago? About that, I suppose." For someone who had dabbled in moving from one time to another, Marcellus was always annoyingly vague about time, Septimus thought. "I'm asking because Fyre said that it needed to be used every day to keep it, alive." "Alive?" Marcellus laughed. "Superstitious nonsense. It is a piece of machinery." "I know," said Septimus, "but that was how she explained it, and it makes sense to me. She said its life drained away unless it was— what was the word she used? Recharged." Marcellus was skeptical. "Septimus, you must remember that Fyre was possessed. She was just saying words like oh, what are those birds with many colors? Parrots." "Fyre was not like a parrot," said Septimus, annoyed. "No, of course not. Not the real Fyre," Marcellus said, soothingly. "However, I can assure you that this chamber is not alive." Septimus felt that it would be wrong to back out now. There was a worn spot beside the door, and he placed his palm onto it. A red light glowed beneath, lighting up his hand, and the door closed silently. A small orange arrow pointing downward now appeared on the other side of the chamber. Septimus went over to it, and reluctantly raised his hand to press it. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Yes," said Marcellus. "Of course I am." Taking a deep breath, Septimus placed his hand on the orange arrow and pressed. The floor of the chamber gave a sickening lurch, and his stomach did the same. The chamber was falling fast, and Septimus had forgotten just how terrifying it was. When he had been in the one on the Isles of Siren, he had been with Fyre, and she had known what she was doing. Now he was with Marcellus, who looked just as scared as he was. Septimus watched the orange arrow plummeting down the wall, like a bird hit by a stone. It was going too fast, he thought. It was going too fast. Suddenly the descent stopped with a bone-jarring thud that set their teeth rattling in their skulls. Marcellus staggered back and grabbed hold of Septimus. This brought them both slithering to the floor, which, being shiny and slightly tilted, sent them cannoning across the chamber, where they fetched up in a pile against the wall. "Ah!" Marcellus groaned. Septimus extricated himself from Marcellus's shoes. He stood up shakily and shook his head, trying to clear the buzzing inside. "Do you think it's landed all right?" Marcellus whispered from the floor. Septimus didn't think it had, but there was only one way to find out. "Open the door." He saw a telltale worn patch on the opposite side of the chamber from where they had come in. He walked gingerly across the sloping floor, and placed his hand on the wall. Septimus waited for the green light to appear that would signal the opening of the door. A glimmer of green rose briefly beneath his hand, then faded away. Septimus rubbed his hand on his tunic to remove any dust, and pushed it back on the path, leaning on his weight on it. Nothing happened. No green light. No opening door. Nothing. A sharp intake of breath came from Marcellus. "Try again, apprentice," he urged. Septimus tried again. Nothing happened. "Maybe there?" said Marcellus, pointing to another spot. Septimus tried there. Nothing. He told himself to keep calm. "Perhaps that might be the place," said Marcellus, indicating a slightly less shiny spot that was not, Septimus thought, anywhere near where the door should be. Nothing. "Apprentice," said Marcellus, "we should ascend." Septimus thought they should too. He put his hand on the orange arrow, which was still pointing downward, and moved his hand in an upward direction, which should have flipped the arrow around to point up. The arrow stayed just as it was. Septimus tried again, but still the arrow did not move, and neither did the chamber. "You're not doing it right," Marcellus said. "You do it, then," Septimus replied, irritated. Marcellus, whose hand, Septimus noticed, was trembling, had no luck with the arrow either. It stayed where it was, pointing resolutely to the floor. "Sheesh," muttered Marcellus. "Perhaps it needs to go down a bit more first," Septimus suggested, running his hand down from the orange arrow. But whether the chamber needed to or not, it would not budge. It was then that the blue light illuminating the inside of the chamber began to fade. The last glimpse it showed Septimus was the flash of panic that shot across Marcellus's face, and then it was dark. No orange arrow, no green light, nothing but a total blackness. Septimus waited for the glow from his dragon ring to kick in. It was strange, he thought, because he didn't usually have to wait at all. His left hand found his right index finger, and he checked that the ring was still there. It was, so why wasn't it glowing like it always did? Why? Septimus felt a flicker of panic in his stomach and fought it down. The total darkness took him straight back to a terrifying night that he had spent, age 7, in a young army wolverine pit. "My ring," he said into the darkness. "My dragon ring. It's not doing anything." "No," came Marcellus's voice, dismal in the dark. Septimus felt as though he could not bear being trapped inside the blackness a moment longer. He had to do something. "I'm going to do a transport." He heard the alchemist sigh and mistook the reason. "Marcellus, I'll come back. You know I will. But I have to get some help. Marcia will know what to do." Another sigh. "Marcia will have to know now, Marcellus. We've got no choice. I'll transport right back here. I won't leave you, I promise." There was silence. "You do believe me, don't you?" At last Marcellus spoke. "Yes, I do believe you, apprentice. I believe you because I trust you absolutely. But even if I didn't trust you, I would still believe you, because unfortunately, I know you won't leave me. Not with a transport." "What do you mean?" Something about the way Marcellus had spoken made Septimus feel very scared. There was a long silence, and then Marcellus spoke. "Apprentice, magic will not work in this chamber." "No, that's not true." "So, does your dragon ring shine?" "That isn't the same. It, too, is magic, apprentice." Septimus ran his fingers across the dragon ring. It sat cold and unresponsive on his finger, just like any other ring. The little buzz of magic that he always felt from it was no longer there. A feeling of doom swept over Septimus. He knew Marcellus spoke the truth. Magic did not work inside the chamber. They were trapped.